everybody, and welcome to Environmental Coffee House. This is Sandy Shellis, and I am joined by my co-host, Jennifer Hines, and today we have a special guest, George Tsakraklides, and we are really happy. He's the author of Disposable Earth in the Age of Separateness. And what I'm going to do today, since we didn't go live, we decided to do this way because I really didn't want to get distracted. So this is such a nice welcome, George and Jennifer. And I'm going to start out, and then I'm going to hand the ball over to you.
Okay.
This is George, and I am going to read his work a little bit because it's important we understand who he is. Life's challenges taught me that when in need, it was my spirit that helped me the most, not my rational thinking. Often inspired by my personal struggles through hundreds of blogs and 3 books so far, I am exploring the toxic cocktail of existential crisis that summarize humanity's current predicament: climate change, human exploitation, tech-induced mental illness, and the 6th mass extinction. My Medium blogs have often gone viral, reaching thousands of readers, mainly on Facebook through Positive Deep Adaptation Group. My work consists of my blogs on Medium, where I'm a top warrior in climate change, economics, future, and food, and my books Becoming Imperfect, An Age of Separateness, and The Climate Change Within. I have most recently also published poems for A Planet Running Out of Time. Lovely. We're really happy to have you. And I'm going to read one quote, and then I'm going to hand it over. Surviving today actually comes in conflict with surviving tomorrow. All of our survival mechanisms have short-term benefits, but with long-term punishing consequences. Resource depletion, consumerism, elimination of other species and habitats to make more space for humans, all have tremendously positive effects in the short term. And that was from George's book, Age of Separateness. Welcome, George.
Welcome, George. We're so happy to hear you.
Okay. Jen, George, give it to you.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled that you're here with us today, George. You're kind of a combination of a blogger, a philosopher, an artiste, and a beautiful face painter, I must say, that also is very beautiful. That front page for your blog. You've also written poetry and have a number of quotes. So what is it that drew you to this very doomer philosophy, and where did you come from, and how did you get here?
I don't know how to respond on the doomer philosophy. I think, I guess you can say I'm a doomer, I'm a collapsitarian, or however you want to. However, other people outside of this scene sort of try and kind of label us and put us in a bucket. But I think in these days today, everyone's a doomer because it's happening right now with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
The way I sort of started was in 2007 with Al Gore's The Inconvenient Truth. That was my definitive sort of wake-up call, although I am a scientist with 3 degrees. So to me, the numbers just spoke to me immediately. When you see a graph and a curve, you know what it can look like. You know if it's exponential or if it's linear, and you can tell where things are going. If the glaciers are melting, the glaciers are melting. That's it. It's very simple. But then I had a second sort of wake-up. So after 2007, I continued on with life as we do with our corporate jobs, and obsessed with the next paycheck, the next promotion, and I sort of went to sleep as we do in this society that um, tells us that we're not good enough and we need to work harder and we need to buy more stuff so that other people think we're great and so that we think we're great.
Wow.
And it's kind of a sleep, really, because we forget what's important, which is our mental health, our planet, our happiness. And I think that I reached that birth point around 2018, I think, when my work actually started getting to me. I kind of realized how toxic corporate environment was, the cultures, the pressures, the fakeness, the the um, the trauma that everyone goes through um, just to supposedly be happy. And following that kind of work experience, after having been in the industry, my industry, which is research, for many, many years and being very successful, it finally burned me out.
Wow.
And I put the two and two together. So the 2007 experience with the 2018 experience was just a wake-up call that it's all the same issue, really. Climate change and the existential crisis that humanity is having is one and the same issue. Climate change is making our existential crisis worse, and our existential crisis is pushing us towards more consumerism, more CO2 emission, so that we can soften the blow of the trauma that we have caused on ourselves, that we have caused on nature, that is cycling back to us.
Humanity seems to be going through something very, very pivotal right now, and it is, as you say, an existential crisis, and we're contending with our own deaths and with the thought of death and with the concept that it's possible that we could die. You know, I mean, this is like the scariest thing for humanity in general, and we act out in all these different ways because we're so scared of death. Have you thought about that also?
Yeah, but that's a good thing, actually. The problem is we're not scared of death. We're in denial.
Yeah, I agree.
The reason that we have built crystal castles, the reason why we want to buy more cars, we want to build more houses, is exactly because we are in denial of our death, of the fact that, like everything on this planet, we come and we go. I think if we accepted our death, if we realized the trauma that we are causing to the planet, we would appreciate life more in all its forms, in all its species, including our own species. We have created civilizations that traumatize us every single day.
Every day.
Everything from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, there is just trauma in this whole process, from your exposure to tech, to your commute, to the pollution, to the isolation that you feel in busy cities, to the artificiality of our life, to the food that we eat, the water that we drink. Everything has become is going in not a very good direction. And this is because we've lost our connection with everything around us. I think what I always say is that humanity, for quite a few centuries now, has considered itself a species that's not from this planet. Somehow better, that it kind of came on a spaceship from some other universe and just landed here, and it's just looking down on everything else.
Everything else. I agree with you. You know,
Better.
when you think like that, the concept of humanity, has been to use everything as if it was here for us instead of with us.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of
Oh, yes,
people
very
in our
much.
genre do talk about that.
I'm trying to be pragmatic about it because
Hmm.
I've gone through, I think, like every environmental activist, I've gone through a shock phase, a grieving phase, an angry phase, um, a depression phase, and sometimes you go through all of them at the same time, in addition to the eco-anxiety. And I feel like I'm over it. I'm sort of in the acceptance phase now, and I think that humanity is a bell curve, just like the COVID virus. We are talking about, oh, we need to flatten the curve, just flatten the curve.
Yeah.
We are the curve, actually. And the
We're the
planet
curve.
sent the virus to try and flatten the human curve. The planet is trying to flatten the CO2 emissions. The planet is trying to flatten the population. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry, I'll get fired for what I'm saying, but everything that goes up must come down. It's not a matter of my opinion. This is simple physics.
Hmm.
This planet with finite resources, you can't just keep growing your population.
Mm-hmm.
It's just simple math. It's not
Mm-hmm.
it's not an opinion.
And populations in other species somewhat self-control, except for the human species.
Yeah, this is because we are the only species that does not obey natural laws, because we have sort of rigged the high court of nature, as I say. The high court of nature finds any
Okay.
kind of way, whether it is a virus or a predator, to control a species population. We have rigged that system because we are the ultimate predator. But what that means is that we now have the responsibility to be our own judges, our own high court. So, in other words, we have the responsibility to control our own population. And I think this is what we have not realized.
I'd
That,
like to
that's
talk
what,
with you about population because that's such a
Absolutely.
key piece of understanding in this whole thing. And also, if we could kind of loop in the need to decrease our population and with humanity's growing awareness due to pretty much this coronavirus epidemic that's happening right now. It's shocked people into this state of disbelief almost. And yet, it also is kind of shocking people into a sense of wakefulness to a certain extent. And there is a huge need to drive down the population of this earth. Everybody knows the population is also on this exponential polynomial trend line, which is just a fancy word for saying it's going straight up. So could you, given those thoughts, George, kind of talk to us about this?
I think this is the most disappointing thing for me, because the population increase is, again, it's about simple math. It's going up, guys, and there's no more planet to feed us. If you had a cage full of hamsters and there was a finite amount of food in there and they kept multiplying, what would you do? You would try to find some way of, if you didn't kill them or cook them, you will have to find some way of contraception, some way of population control, wouldn't you? Why can't we do that for ourselves? Because the thing is, if we don't do it, not only our own species will suffer, the whole planet will suffer.
Is
As I say, we're
suffering.
eating our way through the free buffet of nature. We keep going there. Every Saturday, there's a free buffet, and we're eating our way through it
Quite
until there's
prophetic.
nothing.
Quite prophetic. And, Jen, to just piggyback a little bit off the population, which we know is a problem, it is not helped by our systems, our capitalism in the United States. It's not helped by the food industry churning out, more than we can even consume, the waste, and that continues the spiral upward. And then we don't want to forget about, the various doctrines, the religious doctrines that go
Yeah.
forth and multiply.
I want to make a comparison because I find the criticism of those who advocate population control quite unfair, because I'm not saying that we should not have any children, and I'm not saying that we should kill people.
No.
I'm saying we need to reduce the number of children we have and have a way to slowly start to bring our numbers down. And what I don't understand is that that's a really mild thing actually to suggest, because not only have we not allowed other species to procreate, we have made them extinct.
Yeah.
We've made other species extinct, and now we have people saying, "Oh, but you're going to take my right to have children and have a family." Sorry, mate, we're in that situation now. Way too many of us, and your presence is making other species extinct.
It's so true.
We're all contributing to, the running out of tuna or cod or, species. It's not even habitat disruption. Some of these species that go extinct is just because we're eating them.
Like bats. Like bats. Okay, we have to give a little bit of humor. That's my job. But yeah, exactly. I have a thought that's percolating on this whole thing with the food and the industry and also the inequality in between the countries as well. How do we stop climate change when there are other countries that want to get to where, let's say, the United States is or Europe is, as far as their stuff and consumerism and all? They see that we here had this and they want it, and governments aren't teaching people that that's not right. They're not going forth and saying, no, we have a serious problem with climate change. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's not really, the conversation is not about climate change. It is, but it is deeper. It's about what is happiness. Yes, India. Yes, Zambia. Yes, you can become the next America if you want, but is that actually going to make you happy? People in these poor African countries, many of them, are a lot happier than us in the Western world. They are. There's statistics about it.
Sure, there are.
They are. The level of happiness is happier, which means that we can be much happier and emit less CO2. This is where we want to get, and I think that, again, a present situation with the quarantine, with kind of going basic, is showing us, giving us a taste of how we could actually be happy. I'm talking to a lot of people these days who are telling me, this quarantine thing, I really like it. I'm working from home a lot. I'm cooking a lot. I'm saving tons of money. I'm Skyping with my family all the time because now I'm working from home, so I can do that. There's loads of positives.
Yeah, there are, but there's negatives too, which is the police state and some of that's controversial when you think about, okay, we have all these now rules and regulations, and people are not always self-policing themselves with this, and the research that's come out from University of Pennsylvania and Carnegie Mellon that talks about the month of isolation. After that, the curve starts going back up. So, this is what's happening now. Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here?
Yeah.
I think you raise some valid risks there. I mean, this quarantine guideline list that everyone now has, you need to stay indoors, you need to wear a mask, you need to do this, you need to do that. In my opinion, it's necessary, but it can be weaponized. It can be weaponized to enforce a more sort of big brother system.
That's this discussion that's happening now in parts of.
It could be weaponized in the future, but then again, we know that our governments are basically have not been functioning for many decades now. Our governments have just been kind of vehicles for the private sector to use to promote the stuff that they want to sell to you. It's more important for the government to support the pharmaceutical industries to,
Right.
Charge Americans with huge copays rather than fund the creation of more ICU units so that people during this terrible pandemic can actually have a bed and a ventilator. The people just don't matter. It's about the people's money and people's wallets. That's the government is helping the private sector to get into people's wallets. And this goes back to our existential crisis. It's really all about, I don't know if you've seen in my book, my sort of schematic diagram of what I call the Anthropocene with SIN, which is basically the replacement of Earth's natural cycles with the sort of leaky, imperfect cycles of greed, of profit, of exploitation, of natural destruction, extinction, all of which produce CO2. And this is unfortunately where we have transitioned to. We have created these unnatural cycles that are predators on the Earth systems. And these cycles have moved from the Earth system, from the water cycle, from the temperature cycle, the ocean currents. They have moved onto Twitter. They have moved onto fake news. They have moved on to fascism and capitalism. And these may seem like ideas and intangible things, but they are actually translating into this global trade system that up until a month ago we had, which means that when you go, Sandra, and you get a steak, if you eat meat, which is fine, I eat meat. But
I don't eat that meat, but I eat some. I'm never going to lie.
That meant that, X acres of rainforest were cut down in Brazil. And I will still go and get a steak. So this is what we're locked into. And this is why the problem is existential, because it's very, very difficult to change this, because our whole civilization, our whole species is based on profit. Profit.
It is.
I know this is really complicated because it's about society, it's about fake news, it's about exploitation, natural destruction, the politics of it, it's such a complex thing. But actually, the one central culprit is profit.
Yeah. You're right.
And speaking of profit, George, something very controversial, we're working through the Green New Deal and all thoughts and plans around it. There are pluses and there are minuses to that. And one of the minuses is it's going to greatly accelerate CO2 emissions. Can you talk with us a little bit about the Green New Deal and your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think the Green New Deal is more of a notion. It's not something specific. So, I can talk about it positively or negative. The Green New Deal that I would like to see is a Green New Deal that puts the climate first and it puts emissions first and the economy second. The Green New Deal that most people talk about is basically a ploy to get more investors to throw money and actually grow the economy even more and emits even more. Because just building wind turbines by itself emits CO2. If they want to create millions of new jobs, what do you think that's going to do? That's going to create
Right.
CO2 emissions. That's going to create economic growth. Economic growth is actually what we don't want because the planet can't grow anymore. The Earth is only this big. You can't grow the planet. If the planet was growing, we could grow as well. So, to me, a successful Green New Deal would be one that is the success of which is judged on emissions. Did it reduce emissions? That would be a success factor. Did not reduce emissions, but increase jobs, make investors rich, make governments happy, make, supposed environmental activists say that we've been successful, then that would not be a Green New Deal.
That would be a big failure, actually. And that's what the conventional wisdom is. And unfortunately, our stand is controversial, but we have to educate people out there that.
But I also think it's a case of semantics, because I'm not going against Naomi Klein. I'm not going against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because they talk about the Green New Deal a lot as well. And I don't think they mean a crazy investor free-for-all. But they are in a very sensitive position because they are politicians, and someone will try and take advantage of them. These are, the two people I mentioned are people I have very high in my esteem, and I think they are uncorruptible. But the power of money is so big. And I think, again, this is about semantics and politics. And if you sell a Green Deal to the people, then the people will buy the Green Deal. They won't look at the fine print.
No, it's like the bottom line is what Edward Bernays, the father of marketing. They'll just use the same principles for this, and that is, I suppose, what we are worried about. And I'm sure Naomi Klein thinks about this. She is a very educated person. I'm sure but I don't know if she's spoken of the pitfalls, because then people think, well, what's the alternative? How do we get off fossil fuels if we don't have an alternative? Are we going to just die off? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the solution, and this is also controversial, and it links to the population discussion we've just had, is degrowth. That is, I think, the buzzword.
Yeah, it's a movement.
Talking about. It's not about a Green New Deal. It's not about a green new economic growth. It's about degrowth. But obviously, that's not sexy, is it? Because you can't say that to your voters. Because degrowth means fewer jobs, less money. When actually it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. We can all have a job. We just don't have to make so much money.
Go back to zero. I mean, the simplistic thinking is like, why can't we just erase all debt globally, worldwide? I mean, I know it's economics is much more in depth than that, but a lot of people think that. Why can't we just go back to zero? Jen?
Well,
sorry.
We're coming close to it, actually, with the coronavirus epidemic. I mean, you see the over here in the UK, the unbelievably socialist decision that a kind of right-wing government made to kind of guarantee 80% of all incomes across all professionals because of this crisis. Essentially, it's some kind of universal income if you think about it, but it had to be done. And I'm hoping that it will have to be done globally, because the next time this happens, it's going to be multiple crises. It's going to be the virus and the locusts and 4 hurricanes that, by the way, we're expecting next year to get like 4 huge hurricanes, apparently. These things will become more frequent because of the unhealthy state in which the planet is at the moment. And I guess my fear is that every time a crisis happens, people will not talk about the climate and the planet problem. They will talk about that crisis. This is what really gets me about coronavirus, because coronavirus is not really about coronavirus. It is about what caused coronavirus, which is, I mean, you can talk about the fact that people were eating animals they were not supposed to be eating, or you can talk about the fact that the upheaval in our ecosystems because of the temperature change means that species that would not normally come into contact are coming into contact. It means that viruses that have remained dormant in the permafrost for thousands of years are now coming alive. The whole planet is if I can kind of anthropomorphize the planet, which I do very often because I believe that is a spirit. I believe even the stones, even light, I believe is a spirit because I believe everything is connected. I think the planet is looking through its closet and it's trying to find a solution. And it's not being mean to humans, it's trying to save everything else. And if that means taking the humans out to save everything else, then the planet, who is our mother, is making a very, very difficult choice.
Do you think that that societies around the world will let that happen? Let that decision happen to change like that?
They don't have a choice. They don't have a say. The planet has a say.
The planet has the say. So science.
We'll find the vaccine. The vaccine will come in 18 months and we'll all be like, oh, yeah, look, we are indeed that species from the spaceship because we won this. But that will be another delusion. That will be the ego talking because Earth will find another way. Like I said, it's not a matter of opinion and it's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of math. It's a matter of physics. If the food runs out, the food runs out. And to give you some actual facts and some actual numbers, we're using something like 70% of the Earth's land mass to cultivate crops. And all the scientists are saying that we can't use any more. And now the planet's climate is becoming so unstable with these droughts and floods. The level of kind of breadbasket failures, as they say, that we could be seeing very soon is untold. And sure, you can say, yeah, we're going to put things in greenhouses and we're going to find scientific solutions, but I think that's quite an arrogant way, I think, of thinking that we can have a scientific pill for every ailment.
Wow. Well said. Wow.
Indeed. Well, the Earth is trying to find a solution. I mean, as you said earlier in this conversation, George, if you had like all these hamsters and you want to decrease their population, you could either heat them, which is what is happening, or you could cook them or kill them. That's the coronavirus. I mean, all these things seem to be happening, and it seems to be coming from the Earth in response to what we have done.
Yeah. And I think that people sometimes misunderstand me that I'm actually being literal, that the Earth is sentient. And I like to trip people because I am a scientist. No, I'm not some kind of an apostle. To me, there is no difference between sentient and non-sentient in a closed system such as a planet. And I think what you've talked about before in my articles was the IoT, the EOT, the EarthNet of Things.
EarthNet of Things.
Right.
The EarthNet of Things. Everything on the planet is connected. So these weather systems that we have, these ecosystems that we have, the ocean currents, all of these are the intelligence systems of the planet that circle the Earth, and they respond to any anomalies. So when there is an anomaly, it means that it's going to cause another anomaly down the line. And we can't say what that anomaly would be because everything is connected. If you think that the response of the planet to CO2 will be to do something with the atmosphere, no, it could go into a virus because everything is connected. So this planet is a lot more wise than we thought it was. And there's no way to predict what it will do next to try to balance itself. There's no way to do that. I mean, it's way too complex. We have some really, really sophisticated kind of Earth modeling systems. You know, supercomputers can calculate if I do even X will happen, but they're not actually able to predict. I mean, in the same way that we haven't been able to predict the exponential acceleration of weather events and climate change events that we've seen in the last, I think, 2-3 years. Yeah. It's just on a scale, and these models just keep being revised. What that's telling us is that this planet is way, way too complex to try to understand.
Do you think the Earth will win? The planet will win?
It's really sad that you put that as a question.
I know.
As a conflict, isn't it? Because if we are in conflict with the planet, it means that we have both lost already.
But that's what we are, essentially. We're in conflict with the planet. Humans are in conflict with the planet because we seek to dominate, not coexist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the Earth will win. I don't like to extend my sort of predictions and projections into an sort of ultra doomist, ultra collapsitarian, because to me, I'm more interested about our existential, current existential predicament, and like I always say, if 100,000 humans live in the next century, to me, that's not a success. Because that would be a sad state of a species living in a planet where it has destroyed everything else. I mean, with what dignity would we dare to even live? I mean, I already feel quite guilty that I'm human, to be honest, that because of my species, so many other species have died. I'm not proud to be human. I'll put that out there. And maybe that answers your question in terms of who will win. Do we deserve to win? Here's a question for you.
Well, I think that I like what you talk about as, you know, coexisting, that everything is related. So I don't like to look at it in winning and losing terms, but there are the school of thought in the long term is that humans will lose. You know, you're playing the roulette wheel with CO2 and Jen has a lot of knowledge about the viruses or the permafrost. You know, there's a whole other rabbit hole. Do I want to go on record for me in this, say that we're going to lose? Well, I think long term, sure doesn't look great.
We are a bell curve. We are a bell curve.
You said.
Again, we're talking about we're trying to flatten this curve, flatten the coronavirus curve, when actually the planet is also using the virus to flatten the human curve. Trying to flatten the CO2 curve, the human population curve. It's actually two curves against each other. And to me, that looks like an ecosystem. That's a balanced ecosystem. Because that's what Earth is. You have millions of bell curves trying to flatten each other out. And in the end, what you get is balance. So we might have rigged the Earth's high court and become a super predator that can go up to be 9 billion of people. But in the end, the planet is trying to find a way to sort of limit this one species that is out of control and is threatening to take the whole operation down. Not just the species on this planet, but take the actual infrastructure down, the life support system, the weather system. Because if that comes down, there's going to be very little life left.
It's an amazing time we're living in. Absolutely amazing time. One thing that always fascinates me, George and Sandy, is kind of like the thought that this could be a coming of age in awareness for human beings. And George, in one of your recent interviews, you were talking about how the consciousness of humanity is waking up a lot and getting a lot more complex and addressing these things a lot more. Things that they didn't used to think about commonly are things that are becoming now everyday conversations, like this conversation that we're having. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you see humanity waking up, or if you do. And what will the effect of that be?
That would be an optimistic scenario, but it is possible. It is possible, and I think the example I like to bring to mind, which again relates to the COVID-19 case, is in ancient Greece. So Athens used to be a super state in ancient times. It was literally like the United States of 500 BC. They had their colonies. They would send their ships out, and they would collect taxes from the empire, and they just lived on that. Sure, they exported some oil and things like that, but it was basically a financial empire of those days. And then the war with the Spartans came, and they all huddled inside the citadel and the enclosure of the top of the Acropolis. So you had something like 100 and 150,000 people literally bunkered within the walls up on this hill. Wow. Must have looked phenomenal. And they did that for, I don't know how many years. It was literally years. They were able to get supplies because they still had access to their ships. So then a virus came. And as you can imagine, in a closed citadel with hundreds of thousands of people next to each other, it was like wildfire. Wow. And that was the end of the Athenian Empire. That was the end of the golden age of Athens. Funnily enough, that wasn't the end. That was the beginning of another golden age, because the empire never again became as rich or as powerful. But out of that destitution, out of that destruction, people started thinking. They started questioning their existence. You had people like Socrates, who refused to take the death sentence because he didn't want to apologize for what he believed in. He left a number of students behind him that kind of were the next generation of philosophers. So he went from a state that was exporting capitalism across the Eastern Mediterranean to a state that was exporting philosophy.
How interesting is that? Oh my goodness.
To this day, the impact of Athens has not been its financial powerhouse. It has been the effect that came out of that virus.
Do you see history repeating itself at all?
Right. It has already. This is not the first time it destroys a civilization. It's happened in Portugal, I think. That's how the Portuguese Empire came down. So I think that the only times that as a species we become more benign and become more introspective is when something humbles us, because we are so
Yeah.
selfish and
Mhm.
and greedy. When something really humbles us, when Earth tells us, "You're not the strongest, I'm the strongest," then we start thinking. It's just like a mother talking to a child. "I'm the boss, you're not the boss. You think you are, but you're not. I know
Ah,
what
So true.
you have under your mattress. I know everything because I'm your mother." And yeah, this parent and child relationship, I think, just continues. And I don't know if there is a way for us to become more mature.
well, you
As a
said.
biologist, I'm quite pessimistic because thinking of our biology, and I think the quote that you mentioned earlier about the way that we operate as a brain, the way that we have evolved as a species, is all about finding solutions for the right now, which are good for right now, such as exploitation and natural destruction. It's great. That's how you get your cheap clothes from Zara.
Mm.
It's through exploitation and natural destruction. But in the long term,
Oh,
that's not a good solution
no.
because it's climate change. So our long term, our ability to solve long term problems that affect not my generation but generation Greta, um,
Yeah.
Right.
is very little. We don't really give a shit about our children. We don't.
Mm. It
And about
hurts to hear it, but it
like
is
that,
being caught in that,
I've
maze
been through
of.
the depression, I've been through the anger, I've been through the desperation, I've mourned already. I'm holding out for a ray of light potentially of this COVID-19 thing, making us think a bit more. I think that people have two choices. The one choice is to basically hunker down, turn on your Netflix, visit the
Mhm.
fridge every 5 minutes, get drunk on champagne until it's over. And the other option is turn off your Netflix, think about what this means, think about what this quarantine is um, making you reconsider in your life, readdress about what's important: family, my downtime, my peace of mind, my um, my mental health,
Yeah,
which a lot of people are saying is actually they feel calmer these days
because they're home.
because they're home and because they're focusing on more basic things, because they're earning um, the the mental health reward of preparing their own food, feeling connected to the ingredients that come from nature, feeling connected to their corner shop, feeling connected to their neighbor. Um,
That's so beautiful. I mean, really, listening to you is like listening to poetry for us. It really is. You speak this language, and I hope that we can bring this language to a set of ears that haven't heard it. Gosh, I don't know. And I didn't mean to interrupt. I just had to throw that little pearl of Sandyism in there.
it's I cannot shut up
It's
sometimes.
okay.
My writing is follows my heart. So yeah, it's back to the question that you asked me. It's a question that I have, and I believe that we have we have our potential. We have the potential to reach out and discover what I call the other human that we have inside of us. Because I have a corporate job as well. I have one right now. I
Yeah.
mean,
I'm the
I
only one
am
here that doesn't. work
I'm
anymore.
hooked into this system. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. And our politicians, it doesn't mean that they are bad people. They're just doing their job, which is to get their salary, to appease the lobbyists that have the most power and that give them the most money. That's their job as politicians.
Right.
It's the job description of the politician that's wrong. This is what's difficult to change. That our entire civilization has been built on the wrong values.
Pretty
It's
heavy. This is because it's music to my ears.
Well, it's existential. But
Yes.
the climate change is not an Earth crisis. It is an existential crisis. It's a crisis of the human civilization and the direction that we have taken. Problem is that the more sick the planet becomes, the more sick we become.
Yeah.
And the more sick we become, the less we're able to find a solution. This is what I fear. The more sick we become, the more we need our little rewards, the more CO2 we need to emit. Powerful.
You did say on one of the interviews about the mental health issue, you did say that so many people in the one industry, the promotion industry, the sales industry, the they are experiencing a lot of mental health issues. The people that have to go out there and hustle and pretty much sell the Western lifestyle. Do either of you experience that in your? Because I know when I was full time and in a high pressure position, I sure did experience. There were some
I think
overwhelming
it's huge.
times.
It's great that there's more awareness of mental health issues. I think there's two main fronts at the moment. One is the work environment, and then the other one is the tech environment, the tech disruption, the tech isolation. Basically, the amount of screen time that all of us are spending. And then you have the example of, for example, to take one profession out of the many, to take PR professionals. I think they've been very, very hard hit. I read a statistic from the Chartered Institute of PR Professionals here in the UK, and something like 2/3 of them admit that their job has given them a serious mental health issue. And if you think about it, they're being hit from both ends, both from the really busy work that they have trying to sell ideas to people and connect with people. At the same time, they are constantly on their phones because they need to be tweeting about stuff.
Yeah, it's insane. I couldn't stop thinking about that one thing after listening to you talk on that video with Lord You. It was because I was an HR professional, human resources. I was in corporate, though. I was university, which is like a whole different beast. And as far as it's like a city, that's like a little kingdom in itself. But it just made me think about the big issue of human resources and capital and what we are built on, our philosophies. Both of you are still out there in the workplace, and so it is overwhelming. But I really appreciated that point of view that you brought in.
At the end of the day, for me, it's the big C. It's capitalism. Capitalism means that what matters more is profit. And when profit is what matters, everyone becomes a predator. And you have these predatory cultures in most job environments these days, with the exception of a few professions that are directly humanitarian, like, I don't know, being a therapist or being a gardener, or, where you're actually nurturing something that won't give back to you unless you give something to it. While in reality, most of the current environments today, these sort of bullshit jobs we call, where you're just pushing paper to the next person, you're basically not just pushing paper, you're pushing the trauma to the next person, because you've been traumatized by your boss, so you need to traumatize the person below you. And this trauma just makes the whole rounds until everyone is in this toxic loop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Been there. Unfortunately,
Been there?
I think it made me sick physically. I mean, I have problems, but it didn't help. I think the stressors out there. But this is our life, We have well, some of us have a choice, some of us don't. Some of us didn't know we had a choice.
Yeah.
I mean, younger years, did you know you had a choice, Jennifer? Did you know?
No.
No.
I mean, the thing is, I worked hard all my life. I, am very much in the corporate world. I still have a corporate job, and I'm very engaged, and I actually enjoy it because I love structure and, project management and collecting things and doing things. I mean, I love it, and I love the people I work with. So for me, my job is not at all a trauma, but I'm very much beholden and engaged in the corporate world. I can't say otherwise,
Well, it's good to hear that, because I never thought my job was a trauma until the traumas happened, because I had to handle litigation and I had to handle employee issues, people issues. And people issues, while they are a challenge, I internalized things and I brought them home with me, like the discussion of we're always working 24/7. I worried about these people that were our employees. I worried about the tech that would be paying them, to make sure I oversaw all that. It was definitely, I thought I loved it, but when the stressors came, it was really challenging, really challenging.
Mm-hmm. One thing I have noticed is that conversations that used to be kind of forbidden or verboten, right? Like to talk about climate change, to talk about the inevitability of the breakdown of civilization, all these things, you never could really talk about these things with normal people, right? Normal people, whatever that is, right? But now I see that people's minds are opening up a lot more to these conversations, at least people that I know. And it's not at all an unusual thing. I think this thing that is happening to us here on Earth, right, it is so big that even if you're not consciously aware of it, right, even if you just completely confound yourself with all sorts of distractions and mundane things, it's still going to break through. There isn't a person that isn't going to know about this on some level. I mean, people must be carrying this burden deep, deep inside if they're not expressing it and conscious of it. Do you have any feelings about that, George?
I'm slightly more pessimistic, because I think at the same time there's a risk that you can increase awareness, but at the same time you can hyper-normalize things. The example that I always give is the Aral Sea, which is a huge body of water that used to exist in Asia that very few people know about, but it was literally the biggest lake in the world, I believe, called the Aral Sea. Check it out.
Yeah.
So what happened is, over a series of decades, it dried out. There's a tiny bit left on it now, but essentially there were cities along the coast that, like big cities, big human populations that sustained themselves through fishing. And essentially it was drained out for water, the fields, and for drinking the water.
Sure.
So an ecosystem was destroyed, essentially. And it was destroyed in a way that people were aware it was happening. So there was an awareness it was happening, and still people did not stop it. Why? Because they became used to the situation. And I think the risk is that people will get used to climate change. We will have presidents and prime ministers saying climate change is here. The temperature is going to go up by 2 degrees. Trump, he came out the other week and he said, 200,000 Americans are going to die. Suck it up. I mean, you have the nerve to actually say that
Yeah.
to the people, and not to say we could have prevented things, we could have done this, we could have done that, like Taiwan or Korea or China. I think this is the real risk, that yes, you can bring awareness out, but you have to realize that the more you bring awareness up, the more strong, the less strong your message becomes, because everyone gets used to it.
They're inoculated. They're anesthetized and inoculated to this. People are.
And it's actually a marketing technique and a communications technique, is to say, fine, and this is what Trump does very often. He started with, it's a hoax. I don't want to shock people. I just want to say people, it's like 15 people get sick, and the next day there's going to be just one, and then it's going to be gone. And once he realized that that wasn't working, he said, you know what? I'm going to go the other end. I'm going to tell them 200,000 are going to die.
Yeah.
That way, they can get used to it.
They can get used to it.
So I kind of disagree with you, Dan, actually. I'm a little bit more of a pessimist, because we've been in this situation before. There's the Dust Bowl in the 1920s in the States. Again, a whole ecosystem was destroyed. And what did people do? They picked up and they moved out. What did they do when the Aral Sea dried out? They packed up and they moved out.
There's nowhere to move.
Exactly. There's nowhere to move.
There's nowhere to move.
Climate change is the crisis that is going to affect the whole planet. Unless you move to another planet, there's nowhere to move.
Unless you're like...
and people are working on that.
Are they? They are.
Unsuccessfully.
Unsuccessfully, yeah. We think Mars... that's magical thinking. I think it's magical thinking backed by funny money. Backed by excess, backed by craziness, but...
Arrogance. The Elon Musks of this world.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, somebody was going to bring his name into it. We could go, the political aspect of where we are right now is so, to me, that's a frightening, it's frightening to me where we are. I am frightened as far as the movement I see globally towards these authoritarian types and all. I'm not afraid for me. I have one child. She's 31. I have a kid. And I do worry, but I don't want her ever to become normalized to this shit. So, of course, I'm her mother. So I don't know if that could happen. But how do we stop how do you, well, I guess by keeping what we're doing, right? Talk about it, write about it. George, you're a voice that should be heard by millions.
The way that I try to wake people up with my writing, because I'm not your kind of classic doomist that is just a doomist because it's, I don't know, sexy or different, or I actually, I write with the purpose to awaken people.
Yes.
Every time. By giving them the bitter truth. That's the only way that you can awaken people. And we are getting a taste of the bitter truth now with COVID-19, because I'm afraid that the only way, going back to the conversation about, survival tools for the right now as opposed to survival tools for the future, is we can only see what's right in front of us.
Right in front of us.
This poses the question then, that how can we wake up early enough when the only way that we can wake up is when it's almost too late?
Is that what you think, in a way, that Trump did by going to the extreme and saying to people, get used to it with that? Is that a harsh wake up? Because it certainly is different than how you write. So I couldn't equate the two.
He was trying to save his ass by hyper-normalizing the situation, so that if 150,000 die, he's going to say, well, that's minus 50 than what I said, so I've done a great job.
Oh, God.
It's just unbelievable.
That's a strategy, and it works with a lot of people.
It's such manipulation. But that is the human condition.
Yeah, and I think, many people have said what I'm going to say now, which is that, why didn't people wake up all this time with climate change, and they're waking up now with the virus? Because the virus is urgent, because the virus has finally hit.
Yeah, my sister-in-law has it.
And
My
this is,
stepsister.
yeah, this is what climate change is. Climate change is a virus that is a slow-acting one.
There you go.
And it is the elephant in the room. You won't realize it, you won't see it until you get sick. Viruses.
And then, of course, it's too late. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And the insidious thing about climate change is how much momentum is packed into this boulder that we've started to move, and you cannot stop it. And, there's so much that's baked into it. For example, obviously the CO2 lag time, it's like 10 to 15 years of warming is still not realized. That is going to come no matter what we do.
So like
and that's
to illustrate what I always say to illustrate to people, because this is you've just mentioned the one thing, Jen, that's actually the most important thing in understanding climate change is I usually liken it to the situation of an egg, a frying egg. So the pan is hot, you throw the egg on there, and for a split second, the egg is completely uncooked. It looks translucent on the pan, although the pan is freaking hot, right? We are living through that split second. It's just that in geologic times, that is human generations and generations.
That's right. That's right. We're living in that spot where we know that all these things have to happen irregardless of our actions as a human species. And this is that kind of golden moment between now and between when the shit hits the fan. And here we are talking about
trying to change other people's minds when actually, again, it's not a matter of opinion.
No.
It's fact.
Just open up to this. What I hope from this conversation, I think it's a really good time to wrap it up because it has been an hour and that's my job here to finish. But I hope we can do this again. I would like to hear final comments. I only have a final comment in that I'm a lifelong learner. I guess we all are when we want to be. And I'm fascinated. Yes, it's a scary time, but I'm not panicked. And I'm feeling just really grateful that I can have this medium for as long as I can have it to talk to people and reach out all over the world. So thank you from me, an Environmental Coffee House, George. Jen?
Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. I'm so grateful that we've been able to have this time together, the both of you. I've wanted to talk with George for a long time. He's a great thinker. And I think it's such an interesting time to be alive. And it's so meaningful that we have these conversations. And like George, I also believe that the earth is a sentient being, that the earth is spirit, and that all these things are coming. We don't really know. We know science, we know numbers, we know projections, we know graphs, we can calculate eventualities, but we don't really know how it's going to play out. So we'll just have to keep talking.
Thank you. George, I'm going to let you go last.
I'm going to link to what Jen just said, that we are all one. We are all one. And I think if we could realize that there is no earth and human and earth, it is all one being on this planet, then maybe there is a hope that we can find the harmony that is lacking, so that we don't feel that it's this conflict between humans and the earth, which is an oxymoron anyway. Humans are from earth. So I'd like to thank you both again for your time. This was a great conversation, and I hope we do.
I hope so too. I'll end. Thank you, and Thank you, everyone, for watching. Please share if you dare.